Thank you.
Always so exciting watching the numbers going up, isn't it? Hello, everybody. Do you want to introduce yourselves in the chat?
Yes, please do use the chat. It's lovely to see it. Wow.
Oh gosh,
Oh.
we were wondering if we had people outside Sheffield, but we've got people from all over the world. Hello, everybody.
Wow. Oh, that's lovely. Oh, welcome everybody.
Oh, this is lovely watching it all. It's scrolling up so quickly, I can't quite keep pace. Lovely. I know, John from Brisbane, we thought we would be too late in the day. You must be up in the middle of the night. Thank you.
Yeah, we saw that.
Hola, Raquel in Gibraltar as well. Oh, lovely.
Wow.
From all over. Lovely to have you all here.
Wow, yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely to have you here, everybody. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time for being here, to be here with us today to talk about dying. So we're so happy to see you. Should we start while people continue connecting and speaking? So yeah, thank you again. Thank you for being here. It's lovely to see so many of you there and chatting and so on. I'm Mariana Garcia, a psychologist and end-of-life doula, and part of an amazing movement called Compassionate Sheffield, where we collaborate with individuals, communities, and organizations to enable the small things that actually create a big difference in people's lives and deaths. And for that reason, today we are here with the lovely Dr. Kathryn Mannix. I know she doesn't need any introductions whatsoever, but as you might know, she worked in palliative care for 30 years and is now campaigning for a better public understanding of dying. And she just won an award for that reason. So well done, Kathryn. Amongst the many things she does, she has written 2 amazing books, With the End in Mind and Listen. And if you haven't read them, please do, because they really help us to understand more about dying and to have the tender conversations. So she's here with us today to talk about dying, because talking about dying won't make it happen, but it might actually make us better prepared. Thank you, Kathryn. It's a real honor to have you here with us today.
Mariana, thank you for that lovely introduction. Thanks everybody for coming. There are now 164 of us, people still pinging in and saying hello on the chat. Thank you for that. It's really lovely to be with you all. You'll see, as well as a chat stream, there's a question and answer stream. So Mariana and I will talk for a while after I've finished saying a few words, but we're really interested in answering the questions that you've got. So if you pop your questions in the question and answer and chat to each other about whatever you feel like chatting about in the chat, and we'll talk to each other as things go on. So I'm just going to now try and find...
Just one thing before we start, Kathryn, just remember that this is being recorded. And as Kathryn said, we will have some time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. So use the Q&A for those, for the questions. And please bear in mind that this can be a sensitive subject. So if you need to take some time out, please do, and be gentle with yourself. And with that said, let's start talking about dying then.
Thank you. So let me make my slides appear. Now, what's sad about starting with PowerPoint up like this is that you've missed the introduction. So I'm going to have to just go back and see whether it will make the transition happen. Oh, it won't. It was curtains. I was so proud of it. It was my palliative care joke. Anyway, So some of the time I'm talking to medical audiences, and some of the time I'm talking to the general public, and some of the time it's a bit of a mix. But today, although I know that I've got lots of colleagues, because I saw your names popping up as you arrived, I'm talking to everybody. I'm talking for the general public in the same way as I write my books for the general public. Because if we're talking to each other in that very down to earth, talking about it as it really is kind of way, then that helps us in our professional work to stay in that mode, and we don't make things complicated and medicalize them and start using jargon. So basically I'm going to show you my travel photos, but I'm going to use them to remind us about some things that it would be helpful for us to think about, and then we'll think about them in some more depth, answering your questions at the end. So here's my first holiday snap. This is one tree. This is the angel oak tree on the outskirts of Charleston in South Carolina. This is a spring day. In fact, it's about this week 8 years ago. And I'm there with a friend that I've known only online until that point. And we'd been getting to know each other, she from America and I from England, because our children were dating each other and they are now married to each other. So this is the first time I'd met them, and she and her lovely husband took me out to see this remarkable tree. Nobody's quite sure how old it is. It's at least 800 years old. It might be a couple of thousand years old. It looks as though it's immortal. It's having spring. It's got tiny little flowers on it. But it's not immortal, of course. Someday it's going to die. And I'm going to die. And you're going to die. And everybody that we love is going to die. And it's not great consolation that the people we don't love so much, they're going to die too. The reason I'm starting in this maudlin way is because it's an interesting thing that we've almost become adapted to avoid thinking about dying, to avoid even mentioning dying, and certainly not mentioning dying by using D words like dying or death or dead. It was very interesting watching the news coverage of the Queen, for example, who passed, slipped away, left us, was lost, but very rarely died. And yet she was very definitely dead by the time they got to her funeral. So we're giving away the language, we're giving away the concept. And if we continue to let that happen, what words will we use in order to really talk about dying, the process of dying, to explain it, to make sense of it, to comfort each other? So I want to think about protective reflexes for a moment. We have lots of protective reflexes. Things like if you touch something really hot, you'll move your hand away before you've even realized that the thing is hot. If you are drinking a cup of tea or eating some kind of crummy toast and a little bit of toast or a little drop of tea touches the back of your throat, there are reflexes so that your throat will immediately take steps to clear itself to protect the airway. So we'll cough, we'll gag, we'll splutter, we'll swallow. And that happens day and night, whether we're asleep or awake, even through the night time. Little bits of phlegm make their way up from our airway. They might tickle the back of our throat, and without waking up, we'll swallow them away. So we are designed to protect ourselves, or we have evolved to protect ourselves. So I want to think a little bit about emotional protection. So this is a monarch butterfly. This is on its epic journey from the south of South America up to North America. And this one is resting on a plant in Ecuador, where I photographed it, where my son and my new friend's daughter were living together for a couple of years, working out there because they couldn't get visas to live in each other's countries. That's a different story. This is the only creature with more than 2 legs that I'm going to show you a photograph of, just in case people who don't like the things I'm about to talk about start to feel anxious, I want to talk to you for a moment about spiders. And if we were in a room together and I asked for a show of hands, we'd find that a significant number of the 200 of us who are here today don't like spiders. And a proportion of those really, really don't like spiders. And I'm talking about you people, because people who don't like spiders, who really, really don't like spiders, are actually being made uncomfortable by me saying the word, and I'm sorry about that. These are the people who won't come to barbecues because they know that there might be spiders. They will not go on a camping holiday because they've heard about the toilet blocks. It's not just that they don't like spiders. They don't like thinking about spiders. They don't like the words. They don't like pictures of spiders. They actually don't even like thinking about spiders. And so they have finely tuned defense mechanisms that keep them away from the occasions where that might be something to see or encounter or talk about. It's a psychological swerve that helps them not to have to confront their psychological enemy. And my fear is that we're doing that about dying too. That it's not just that we don't want to think about death and dying, we don't even want to think about thinking about dying and death. And that's a real problem, because it means that people are unprepared for something that is absolutely and definitely going to happen to every single one of us. So I began wondering, what can we do to change that? And I thought about the person who I knew best, who knew the most about just the process of dying. And that wasn't in fact any of my bosses or colleagues in medicine. It was my grandmother. My grandmother, born in 1900 and living during her teens and 20s and 30s, the life experience of dying and death that women, and it largely has been women, have had for hundreds of years, being a carer at the bedsides, at home, of people who are so sick that they are almost certainly dying, and hospital has nothing to offer dying people. So she became familiar with dying, familiar with the routine of looking after dying people, familiar with the way somebody changes as the process of dying progresses, familiar with the breathing changes, the onset of unconsciousness, the way breathing happens in unconsciousness that's noisy and strange and unfamiliar to most people now, but very familiar to her and her sisters and her aunts and her mum when she was a young woman. And she expected to pass that knowledge, that wisdom on to her daughters, who would then have handed it on to their daughters, including me. But what happened was 20th century medicine progressed at such a rate that actually it did become worth taking dying people to hospital because some lives could be saved. And that was fantastic. We've got so much more treatment now than we had 100 years ago when my nana was in her 20s. And it means that taking somebody in a hurry to hospital in extremis might save their life. But it means we've also forgotten about what are the circumstances in which that kind of hope is a hopeless hope, an unrealistic hope. And it's a disturbance of what would have been a peaceful dying at home. And I thought maybe the way to give people the sort of knowledge that my nana had was to take them to lots of deathbeds, like she'd been at lots of deathbeds. So that's what With the End in Mind is. It's a book of stories. It's not medical. It's got no jargon in it at all. And it's just stories of people living while they're dying. It's my eyes because they're stories of people who I met. But I'm taking each reader with me. We're sitting on a little sofa together, and it's as though we're watching it on a little video as we see what's happening, and we talk about it, and we notice. We notice the changes. We notice the weariness. We notice the creeping onset of sleep that people can't resist, the sleep-wake cycles that come through the day, the gradual onset of unconsciousness, the strange changes in breathing, fast to slow, deep to shallow, noisy because people no longer feel their throat, even that primitive protective mechanism now completely switched off in an unconscious brain. And a final breath that is nothing like the things that Hollywood or our soap operas would have us believe. Because we've become unfamiliar with dying, but because we don't know what we don't know, and we take our beliefs about dying from the information we can get from soap operas or from newspaper articles, or, you know, I know there are rough parts of Sheffield, so, you know, maybe at night time it's rough because there are orcs out there. I don't know if we've got anybody here from New Zealand today. Here's a death scene from EastEnders. This was actually a magnificently told story. This was very well done because the EastEnders scriptwriters were advised by palliative care specialists, but they found that their readers were drifting, their viewers were drifting off, putting the kettle on, not watching these scenes. And so eventually they had to soup it up and turn it into an assisted dying story just to keep the viewers. So when we see dying on cinema and on screen, what we see is sensationalized dying to keep our attention. Perhaps one of the best portrayals of terminal illness in cinema is Philadelphia. This is Tom Hanks, who's playing the young lawyer who's the hero of the story. And his terminal illness trajectory is really, really convincingly done. But of course, we don't see him die. We see him talking to his mum. We see him having some kind of reconciliation with the antagonist, who's played by Denzel Washington. And then we move to a cemetery and we portray death either as agonizing or as spectacular, or we just gloss over it and move straight to the cemetery. And you'll notice that now that we've mentioned it. Death is not well served by entertainment. And yet, in other parts of the world, it isn't a secret at all. So this is still part of my trip to Ecuador. This is in a town, an agricultural town in the north of the country, up in the Andes. And what you can see here, obviously, is a funeral shop. It does not look like a British funeral shop. Partly it's very brightly painted. It's obviously fairly recently probably been a fruiterer's. And in fact, what's happened is it's swapped with the next shop down the hill from it. So there's a greengrocer's next door that isn't very decorated and probably was the funeral shop. And here we are in the funeria. And you can see there's no attempt to hide what this is about. What intrigued me, and the reason I took this photograph, is that the shop next door up the hill, you might just be able to make out, is a cafe. And when I first was here parking the car, there was a queue for that cafe that stretched around, and they had to move themselves around the coffins because the coffins were a little bit in the way of them. And people were chit-chatting, and somebody was leaning on a coffin. And, you know, this is all part of the way we live in a country that is not unfamiliar with dying and death. We don't even pretend that tiny babies don't die. Look at that tiny little casket at the very top there. So in Ecuador, it's a volcanic country. Bodies are put into coffins, and then very often the coffin is put into something that is above ground, often made out of breeze block, because the ground is not diggable to bury bodies away. And cremation has not yet taken off there very well, so bodies go into coffins, simple or fancy. And what else can you see? Well, there is for anybody here who speaks Spanish, you can see the number to call to have somebody come when you need it. And also you can see that there is a sale on with reduced prices for mortuary boxes or coffins, and that's probably because there's competition. There is another shop that looks very like this a little bit further up the road, because dying happens, and we're not pretending that it doesn't happen in Ecuador, because actually families are still familiar with it. And what's starting to happen is the creep of developed world medicine, first world country medicine for the richest people on an American model, and gradually the wealthier people are losing their familiarity with ordinary dying. But most people still will be looking after their own if they're so sick that they're going to die. So what I'm trying to do with my campaigning is joining forces with so many other people like Dying Matters and Dying Matters Week and all the different partners in the coalition, really just to cast a window onto the process of dying, to remind us all about what it looks like, what happens, and that this is a normal process that's going to happen at the end of almost everybody's life. A little over 5% of us will have a sudden and unexpected death. But when we look at those deaths and we describe them as sudden and unexpected, we find that for most of those, there's some condition that's been gradually deteriorating in the background for a significant amount of time. That the death itself, perhaps from a heart attack or perhaps from a stroke, might be sudden on that day, but it isn't really unexpected. And opportunities for planning ahead, for talking to families about the things that the person wants, the treatments they would agree to, the treatments they would not agree to towards the end of their lives. There have been lots of warning signs that it's time to start to have those conversations, but nobody has told the person that. Nobody has told their family that, because advanced care planning is a conversation that everybody thinks somebody else will start. So everybody has agreed that it's important, and nobody knows who blows the whistle to start it. And it's something that we have to start to think about. Is it a healthcare conversation? Well, some of it is. Some of it is about treatments that we wouldn't want to have, or places where we wouldn't want to be cared for. But a lot of it is about what matters most to us. A lot of it is about putting right the relationship things that have gone wrong that we wouldn't want to leave unsettled at the ends of our lives. A lot of it is about celebrating the things that are so important and give our lives meaning. So maybe this actually is a societal thing rather than a medical thing. Maybe it's public health rather than palliative care or geriatrics or emergency departments that should have the most influence if we need medical influence at all. But what I really think is that we need to demedicalize the process of dying. We need to start to think about death as a thing that happens in the midst of life. We need to stop using euphemisms like sunsets. Yes, I know, but this is a sunset over the Pacific from the Galapagos Islands, so obviously I had to show it to you. But we need to be able to talk to each other about what matters most to us in our lives. We need to be able to talk to our nearest and dearest about what matters most to them in their lives, so that we're able to be each other's companions during that phase of life where we've got so much less energy, so much more time simply to sit or lie and think, and make sure that we are still able to see a person as their whole person, able to enable them to enjoy their days and make the most of living, and not see themselves as a patient whose only needs are medical needs. So I'd like to invite you to just take a moment now to stop and think. We know the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I think it takes a village to help a person to live the last part of their life well, whilst their body is starting to die. I want you to just stop for a moment and think about who's your village? Who are the people who mean the most to you? Who are the people who may be very distant that you want to be in close communication with? And it's so much easier now to be in close communication. We got very slick at it during the first wave of COVID. Who are the people nearby, round and about, who might be the people who are my inner circle, who need to know what I like and don't like about the way I'm looked after, exactly what colour I like my tea, exactly how I like my sandwiches prepared, what my cat prefers if somebody does my supermarket shopping for cat food for me. Who's the next tier in, the people who actually understand about the things that are intimately important to me, my relationships, the things that make my life have meaning? my beliefs about the meaning of life, my beliefs about my culture, my spirituality, the things that have broken my heart, the things that lift my heart and make it sore. Who knows those things about me? Because one day I might be too sick to tell people what matters most to me. One day you might be too sick to explain to people what matters most to you. And at that point, it's possible that decisions will need to be made, that people will want to respect what matters to you. And they can't do that unless you've told them. So who's your village? Who will respect your views? Who will make sure that your wishes are known and taken into consideration when decisions about where you live, where you're cared for, what treatments you might be offered are being made? It's interesting that people who say, oh, I've sorted everything out for when I die, I hear this quite often, and what they mean is they've written a will. Have you written a will? And they've left instructions for their funeral. So they've sorted out the after death bit. But the bit that's going to affect us, my friends, is the bit before we die. And that seems to be very much harder for people to talk about. So who is your village? Who needs to know what about you, not only for after you've died, but for while you're living, you're dying? That really precious and quite precarious end of lifetime. So I'd like to wind up by just wishing us all a great Dying Matters week next week, and a really, really exciting life full of wonderful things, and then a really, really well planned death on your own terms when the time comes. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kathryn. That was wonderful. And thank you everyone for all what you have mentioned in the chat and for your questions. So we have a few questions and I will read it aloud if that's okay. Lou is asking us, how can healthcare professionals in palliative care begin to work collaboratively with local doulas to achieve a person's ideals of a good death?
Oh, we like this question, don't we, Mariana? We like this question. So for full disclosure, Mariana is a trained end-of-life doula, and there is a professional association of end-of-life doulas in the UK, and I am a patron of End-of-Life Doula UK. So there may be an End-of-Life Doula UK bias to what I'm about to say. I've also done training for another organisation called Soul Midwives, who also offer a very similar sort of service. And in fact, there are several people who are qualified as soul midwives who belong to End-of-Life Doula UK as well. So these are companions who are trained to be, I guess, the wise women, although some of them are men, who my Nana's family would have called upon at home 100 years ago. You know, the lady at the end of the street who comes along to help when babies are being born, when corpses need to be laid out, and while people are dying. So this wisdom is being reinstilled into people who volunteer to train, who actually pay to train. And if you're interested in it, there are bursaries to support that training, so that they can help with the conversations around what to expect as a person is dying, helping a family to think about the things that might need to be talked about, and then being alongside a dying person and their family, not in a medical or nursing capacity, although a surprising number, or perhaps not surprising number, of people have been nurses, midwives, doctors, healthcare professionals in the past. But this is not a healthcare professional role. This is a social role of support and kindness and affirmation. This is the person who will notice that you're running out of tea bags, or the dog hasn't been walked, or the bin needs to be put out. This is the person who will notice that you've been sitting up for 3 nights running, and can we make an arrangement that lets you get some sleep tonight? This might be the person who does the sitting for you or helps you to arrange the sitting. This might be the person who does some shopping for you, or who sits for you while you do your shopping. This is a person who just wants to join your village in a way that is the most useful to you, who brings with them a wisdom and a compassionate understanding of the process of dying, and so can explain it as it proceeds. So as you listen to it, you don't hear those strange breathing noises and mistake them for choking or drowning or suffering, and take that mistake with all of its horror into bereavement with you. So how can healthcare professionals start to work more closely with end-of-life doulas? I think it's a wonderful thing to think about. There is a live experiment going on at the moment in Leeds, where they have a pot of money where they are using end-of-life doulas as end-of-life family support in the community, and the doula is allowed to move in and out of other settings if the patient moves in and out of other settings as well. And we hope that they're going to evaluate that by the second half of this year, so that we can see whether some of the predictions that they make about this service from previous experience come true, like that it helps people to have more choice because there's a person around to talk through their choices with them, that people are less likely to use complicated hospital interventions or indeed to be admitted to hospital, and they're certainly less likely to be admitted to hospital in a crisis. And that has consequences of cost savings for the NHS, which might be cost savings which then could be redeployed into providing a doula service in a particular locality. So we're waiting to hear. In the meanwhile, we're a little bit not sure about doulas. I was a little bit not sure about doulas when they approached me and said, would you like to be my patron? I actually started by thinking, who are these crazy people? And then I realized that actually these are people who are speaking the language that we're talking today, and that, you know, I was satisfied that they've got a really sensible, good training and sensible, good governance structure, which are the sorts of things that worry NHS practitioners. So what do we do? Do we think about commissioning these services? Do we think about following the progress of people who have been able to privately employ a doula, because some of them work voluntarily, but some of them, it becomes their job and they need to be paid to do their job? So I think there are a variety of different models available. And I think one of the things that we need to be as healthcare practitioners is open to the notion that we meet a patient who says, oh, I've got a doula, by the way. And we don't do what I originally did, was my heart sinks and I think, oh, what's that going to be like then? We say, fantastic. It would be really great to meet your doula next time we're talking together, so that we can, you know, make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Thank you, Kathryn. I couldn't have said it better, and it's good that people are getting to know that there are more doulas out there and that we are here to help. And thank you, Lou, for the question. So the next question is a really interesting one. Elle said, the process of dying you explained sounds very peaceful, calm, and possibly a good death. But realistically, how often does this happen? I've read personal stories which have been horrific, traumatic, painful, breathlessness, which definitely does not duplicate the good death.
Yeah, and it's a really, really important question. So let's separate out two things. First of all, there is the process of dying, the kind of final common pathway, if you like, which is, I guess, parallel to what would normal, ordinary giving birth look like. There's a sequence of events that happens in every labour that more or less follows the same sequence, but the duration of it, the comfort or discomfort of it, the exact position of the baby, the placenta, the size of the mother, all of these things change how each individual labour will proceed. But the better the antenatal care has been, the better prepared midwives and obstetricians are for the labour that lies ahead. They know the position of the baby, they know the position of the placenta, those sorts of things. So in a similar way, if symptoms of an illness are well managed, so the person is not horribly uncomfortable, then the process of dying that I've just described is what I'm calling ordinary dying, the parallel to ordinary labour. Because dying itself causes two symptoms. It causes gradual loss of consciousness. And then once consciousness is lost, these breathing cycles that are just reflex breathing cycles that the person doesn't notice, but we notice, and we are discomforted by them because we normally don't see people breathing like that. Normally, if a person's so sick that they're so unconscious that they're doing breathing like that, under other circumstances, they'd be in an intensive care unit on a ventilator whilst their illness was being managed. And obviously we don't do that. Well, in Britain, we don't do that at the end of people's lives, although in America, very often people are escalated to intensive care to have a few more days or even just a few more hours of being alive. So, can dying be that comfortable? Yes. Is it usually that comfortable? It can be, but it relies on the symptoms having been well managed of the illness. So that now is the equivalent of the antenatal care, is the before death care of making sure that we've understood what it is that's causing a person to have pain, breathlessness, itch, constipation, diarrhea, things that can make the body feel uncomfortable, and that bodily discomfort then discomforts the mind and makes people feel anxious or agitated or sad or afraid. So getting symptoms right early on is another important part of end-of-life care practice. And if we delay asking for help with symptoms until very late in an illness, we are making it less likely that symptoms will be properly managed during that very last part of life. It is not unusual, I think, so from my palliative care practice now, from 30 years in palliative care, largely in a big, busy teaching hospital, not in the kind of special environment of a hospice where I did on-call and clinics, but my day job was largely in a hospital. It's not unusual for palliative care referrals to be made very late, and for palliative care staff to feel incredibly frustrated that this person could have had weeks or months of less discomfort, perhaps alongside other treatments that were running for the illness that they had. But because people didn't want to have the conversation that involved saying palliative care, in case that turned into a conversation that was about dying, the referral wasn't made. So we need to think about what are the barriers to having those conversations that enable symptom management to be properly managed. Doesn't need a specialist every time. GPs do excellent symptom management. Geriatricians do excellent symptom management. Cancer services are very good at palliating the symptoms of the illnesses that they commonly see. Respiratory teams are great at managing breathlessness. Gastro teams are great at managing nausea. But for each of us in our practice, we sometimes reach the point beyond which our own expertise, because we're specialists in something, but we're not specialists in palliative care, our own expertise has reached its limit. And at that point, asking an expert whose expertise is in symptom management is a sensible thing to do. We don't need to sweep in and take your patient away. We just need to come in and give you some new ideas. And then only the most complex patients might need to have their care actually directed by specialists in palliative care. So the most difficult patients end up in the care of palliative care services. Over a career in hospices and community palliative care teams and a hospital palliative care team, the teams I was working in looked after somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people at the very end of their lives. Let's call it 12 for a kind of rounded number. I can think, if I think really, really carefully, I can think of maybe a dozen people where their dying was disturbing, where it was uncomfortable, where I really thought I would hate this to be happening to me or to a person that I loved. So we mustn't pretend that uncomfortable dying doesn't happen. But if it's 12 people out of 12,000 people, then we also have to get a sense of proportion about how often does it happen. Doesn't mean everybody was comfortable, but then not every day is comfortable anyway, is there? We've done something about sacredizing the last day of life. Last day of our lives is not going to be our best day. but it's almost certainly not going to be our worst day either. We've had days where we've had headaches and pains in our joints and felt a bit off colour, and we got on with that day and it was bearable. And what we need is symptom management that allows people to be comfortable enough that their peace of mind isn't disturbed by any symptoms that they've got left. We can aim for perfection, and it's the enemy of good enoughness. A good enough dying is perhaps the thing we want to be aiming for. I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that.
Thank you, Kathryn. Many questions have been disappearing from my list, so I'm gonna go for the next one that is at the top. And this is from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any tips for how to approach these conversations with a person who pretty much has a phobia regarding talking about death, as it triggers negative thoughts patterns?
Yeah, well, I think it triggers negative thought patterns in everybody, but some people really are phobic, and we have to respect that some people also cope by denial, and that if you choose to believe, or perhaps don't choose but find that you don't believe that you are so sick that you're dying, then you don't feel the anxiety and the discomfort and the worry about the dying either. So denial's a really, really helpful coping strategy for the person, but it's really difficult for the people who love them because they want to be able to talk about things and plan things, and they can't do that in the presence of the person. If it's a person who's got a phobia, then perhaps what we need to do is remember that they're in charge, and that giving somebody a really good talking to rarely is the answer to anything. But giving people a really good listening to can be very helpful. So for the person who's dying and phobic, to say something along the lines of, there are things we probably need to get organised and sorted out, things that you might be worrying about when you're sitting on your own, and I want to be able to support you the best way I can for that. I don't want my supporting you to be a burden to you. You tell me what will help. If you want to talk, I'll listen. If you want to make a list of things that need to be done, but you don't want to talk to me about it, we'll do it that way. I'm here to support you. You let me know how to do that. But it is incredibly hard to work to support a person who absolutely will not allow the conversations. And I'm really sorry if you find yourself in that situation. It's really tricky.
Thank you. Another question said, my mother-in-law is 93 with no obvious major health issues, but starting not to cope well. I'm very anxious and quite cross about everything. We wonder if part of that anxiety is about death. How do we start that conversation and help her if that's his fear?
Interesting, isn't it? So I wonder whether this is a family that's talked about these sorts of things before, or whether that's a thing that people feel they're not allowed to talk about. But it's quite unusual for a person in their 90s not to be thinking about their mortality. And what's quite interesting is often if you offer the opportunity for that conversation, then they will take it. So my piece of super advice that I've stolen from somebody else, you know, a family that I looked after many years ago, was a similar sort of situation, a very elderly parent, and their adult children wanted to be able to talk about what this parent wanted. And they felt that they didn't want to upset the parent by starting the conversation. So eventually one of the sons decided he was going to go and I'm just going to have it out with mum. And of course that went terribly badly. And they were reflecting on this afterwards, and what they realized was that actually the brother had been trying to treat their mum like a child. Come on, mum, now let's be sensible about this. And actually she's still their mother. So another one of the brothers then went in and said and used her as mum. Mum, we're all worrying about this thing. Nobody quite knows how to broach it. I know that I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about it, and so does my sister. We think you could help us to feel better, but only if you want to. We don't want to upset you. And yet, you know, everybody's worrying. We just don't know what we would say if the doctors asked us what you wanted. If you got so sick sometime that you couldn't say, we just wouldn't know. Have you ever thought about it? And, you know, sometime when it suits you, how about could we talk about it? Even if it's just for 10 minutes. And now mum is being asked to help her kids. That's the right way round for the parent-child relationship. The mum is able to come back and say, do you think I've never thought about it? Do you think I'm really silly? I worry that you're going to come in here one day and you're just going to find me dead. Every night I go to sleep and I think, will I be lying in a comfortable position when they find me dead, so they don't think I was struggling or frightened as I died? Thinking about death is my constant companion, and I'm trying not to make it yours too. So she's mothering them, she's defending them, she's protecting them. So my advice for talking to our precious older people is to maintain the relationship that is the right order of relationship with them, that we ask them for their blessing, we ask them to be in charge, we ask them to give us advice. We can offer in our able-bodiedness to do things for them, but we mustn't take over, we mustn't parent them, and we mustn't infantilize them.
Thank you. I love every time you mention that story. Those really go to my heart. And last year I actually did the advanced planning with my mom. And I have to say to people that are scared about that, that was one of the most beautiful times we have had together. It was so meaningful and we connected so beautifully. And it was 50-50. It was not only she telling me what she wanted or her beliefs, or it was me also telling her mine, because you never know who is gonna die first. So, but yeah, thank you. Always love that story. Thank you, Kathryn. So Ruth is asking, how do you become a death doula?
Mariana, that's your question.
Well, as Kathryn said before, like in the UK, well, there's many different organizations around, and the first thing is that obviously you want to become a death doula, but there are many organizations, and in the UK there is All Midwives, and it's also Living Well, Dying Well, and they actually are amazing organizations. I became one in the UK because I was also certified in the States, in the UK with Living Well, Dying Well. And it's a really deep journey inwards to be able to do the journey outwards, as I always said, because you have to be your first client. And yeah, so you have to really visit death personally, if that can be said. So it's those two organizations in the UK, is many others around the world, but you actually don't need a certification to become an end-of-life doula. It's good if you do, but it's not like you need a number to be a doctor, you know, and be certified as such. And I do love when Kathryn said about her grandma, because she was a doula, she was definitely a doula, and that's how it used to be before, you know, it's the knowledge that used to be passed generation by generation. The problem is that we have become so far apart from death, and we have put it out in the institutions, and that's what we're trying to do, bring it back to the community and learn more. But yeah, please, if you want to know more, visit Living Well, Dying Well, or Soul Midwife if you want to. We have another question, and yes, Kathryn is our patron to the End-of-Life Doula UK, so you will have closer contact to her. Louise is asking, if you have time, I would like advice on how to get over my discomfort in talking to my two friends who are having end-of-life treatment. You mute, Kathryn.
So I'm clicking like mad and nothing's happening. Whose name was that?
Louise.
Louise, I'm sorry to have two friends so sick at the same time. Gosh, that's really, really hard. So one of the things that people tell us repeatedly when they know that they're dying is that their friends find it difficult and they feel that it's a little bit awkward, and that they recognize that, they understand that. The awkwardness turns into one of two things: the person who just stays away because it feels too awkward, and the person who still turns up and says, I don't know how this is for you, I'm not quite sure how best to support you, but I love you and I'm your friend, and just tell me what's the right thing to do. So maybe that's the first step. And for any conversation that feels like you're a little bit daunted by it, my advice is to not think about having the conversation. Think about naming the thing that needs to be talked about in an invitation. So look, I can see how things are for you recently, and I wonder whether you worry about things and would like to talk about things. And if you do, and if I could be useful by listening anytime that suits you, you just say. So now you've said it, it's out there. I worry that you're worrying about things. I worry about how you're doing physically, how you're doing emotionally. I'm willing, so it's named, but actually we might now be going to talk about, you know, the price of petrol, and that's okay too. So issue the invitation and then leave the control with the sick person, so that they don't think, oh, she's coming around again and she always wants me to talk about how sick I am, when actually I'd really far rather that we, you know, looked at what's happening to the tulip bulbs or whatever. So an invitation and then step back.
Thank you, Kathryn. And we have another question. David, he says, do you have any tips specifically for very ill people who are in hospital whilst dying and their families?
It's disappointing, isn't it, not to be in our familiar place. We all have a little vision of how we would like our perfect death to be, I think, or at least the sort of people who sign up for a webinar like that perhaps have that vision. I want to be in my bed, in my bedroom, looking out of my window at my apple tree. If I'm downstairs, I'll still want to be in the room that looks at my apple tree. There's nothing special about the apple tree. It's 3 parts dead, but I've watched it doing the seasons for years and years and years, and I'd like to continue to watch it doing that. So then to be separated and put in hospital, I think that's really, really hard. And yet there's really good research from New Zealand that shows us that it isn't the room that the bed is in that matters. It's the people around the bed that matters. So what we need in hospital is to be able to enable the space to belong to the person in the bed and the people who love them most. And that's quite difficult because we've got to balance the needs of the other patients who are in that ward around that person. We know that beds in single bedrooms often can't be allocated because anybody who's got a contagious illness has to be isolated to protect everybody else. So often people who are so sick that they're now dying are in a ward where there are 3 or 5 other people at the same time, and we draw those curtains around the bed and we kind of pretend they're soundproof, and they're really, really not. It almost makes me wonder whether we'd be better not to draw the curtains and to say to people, yeah, this is happening, so be kind to this family, be compassionate with this family, hold this family in your hearts while they're visiting, doing this very difficult act. Hospitals might be able to allow you to have photographs beside the bed, blanket from home. I once bumped into our director of infection control in the hospital that I will not name, coming up the fire stairs rather than the main staircase with a shopping bag, and saying to me, just open that door for me. He's holding this shopping bag like this, and the shopping bag was wriggling and it had somebody's dog in it because this person was dying and they were missing their dog. So let's think about how can we personalize the space? What can we do that makes this space around this beloved person remind them of how much we love them and remind them of who they've been in the world through all the years that they've been alive? And let's relax hospital rules as much as we can. We have to observe infection control. That's for everybody's protection. But within those rules, what can we do that helps this space belong to this person and the family instead? For families, some really helpful advice that I've watched nurses giving down the years and stolen. Wear comfortable clothes, have elasticated waists, set your alarm on your phone so you don't miss when you need to renew your parking, bring snacks in, find out where the kitchen is, find out where the coffee machine is, find out how to use it, bring your slippers, bring your newspaper or a book or your podcasts or whatever it is, because you know at home, even with people that you love very much, you don't just sit and eyeball each other, do you? And stroke their cheeks. That's not what we do at home. We sit in the same space and comfortably ignore each other. So set yourself up to comfortably ignore the people around the bed. Chat to each other, listen to your podcasts, read your newspaper, ask for help with the crossword clues, just like you always did, with your comfy jumper on, with your slippers on, with a cup of tea in your hand, because that will relax you. And the thing that will really change for the person in the bed is the calmer their companions are, the more that calm trickles across and into them as well. So just make it a really calm space.
Thank you, Kathryn. And I'm sorry, as many things in life, the time for this webinar is coming to an end, and we could stay here like answering so many questions and really interesting one, but we have to cut it here for now. But yeah, I think it's really important that the thing that you said, Kathryn, and it's now new studies showing that the heart is more than a pump, and is that energy, you know, that actually spreads, and that being comfortable and being at peace, you will help the person who is actually dying. So thank you for that. And sorry we cannot answer all the questions, but thank you again, everyone, for being here. This is only one of the many events that we are bringing as part of our Dying Matters program. And if you want to know more about the other activities, please check our website, compassionate-sheffield.co.uk. We really hope this has been beneficial, but we also recognize that speaking and thinking about dying can be heavy. So please take special care of yourself today, and we would like to invite you before the time finish to do a little breathing exercise. It's really small, but we all know that breathing not only helps us relax and bring us here and now, but it also connects us with life. So just for 1 minute, we want to invite you to maybe feel your body wherever you're seated, move, try to ground yourself, feel your body, and do 3 deep breathings. So let's try to use your belly instead of the chest. Let's try to use the belly and do it as deep as you can. So if you want to follow my rhythm or use yours, just 3 deep breaths. So breathe in, hold there for a little bit, and breathe out. Breathe in again. And breathe out. And the last one, breathe in. And breathe out. And if you can, do something nice after this. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Kathryn. This was wonderful. And hope to see you again in the future, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana, so much. And good luck as you get Compassionate Sheffield up and moving. If any city can do this, Sheffield can do it.
Yeah, we need to speak about that in another one. Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you. Bye.